Every July in the United States, we light off fireworks and celebrate a certain document. A document that begins like this. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It was at this point, before the United States even existed, that we set a goalpost in the ground. And over the years, we have gotten closer and closer to it. Segregation has been ruled unconstitutional. The treatment of American Indian nations has been re-examined. Civil rights protections at the federal level have been expanded. And on a social level, there's greater awareness of entrenched biases and greater efforts to combat them. One of the great strengths of the United States is its diversity. It was a black scientist who revolutionized agriculture. It was a Muslim engineer who erected the tallest building in the world in 1973. It was a Jewish professor who created the vaccine for polio. And you'll notice that's just talking about men. There's so much I could say about the contributions of women over the years. When we embrace this diversity and multiculturalism, we all win. We're closer than ever to a society where, one might say, anybody can be anything. And yet, we're still so far.
Former Minneapolis police officer for the murder of George Floyd.
More than 500 bills restricting the rights of LGBTQ+ people have been introduced.
Yet another possible anti-Asian hate crime tonight.
Increase in reported threats against faith communities, particularly Jewish, Muslim, and Arab.
It would be foolish of me to suggest that racism has magically ended because the Supreme Court and Congress said it's not allowed anymore. The legacy of decades of discrimination still hang over the country in issues like wealth gaps, disproportionate representation in powerful and public-facing fields, violence and neglect from officers expected to uphold the well-being of all people. And there's little consensus on how to fix it. Even well-meaning solutions can fail to grasp the root of the issue. Perhaps there is no policy prescription for it. As long as a black woman leading a movie is considered politically charged while a white man is not, prejudice still holds sway. These have been intractable problems across all human history. So, what does Zootopia, the little billion-dollar Disney movie that could, possibly have to add to the conversation? Well, more than you may think. Now, to be sure, it's not the only movie that wants to talk about prejudice using metaphors. Far, far from the only movie. But there's a key difference that I want to focus on here, and it starts with this promise made within the setting. A promise taken to heart by a young Judy Hopps that Zootopia is a place
that anyone can be anything!
And to be sure, it's quickly made apparent to us that this promise is not perfect. Not everyone believes in this ideal, as expressed very bluntly in an encounter with the bullying Fox Gideon. But it doesn't discourage her from her dream to be a police officer, the first rabbit police officer to help make the world a better place. We see her in the academy having a hard time, to be sure, but persevering, using her unique talents, using her disadvantages and turning them into advantages. And look at that, she becomes a police officer. She proved the world wrong. What a great story that... Oh, we're still at the beginning. The story's just barely started yet. This is something I think goes unappreciated. It would have been much easier to write the story in a way where this is the conclusion of the arc. She wants to be a police officer. People tell her she can't be a police officer because she's a rabbit. She becomes a police officer and the stigma against rabbits being police officers is over. The end. But by continuing this further, the movie instead begins to test her beliefs. Yes, a bunny has become a cop, and with Precinct 1 in crisis mode, there's an obvious need for as many officers as possible to be out there searching for clues. So she's given the role of
parking duty. Dismissed.
Parking duty?
And here's a major blow against her ideal. The chief, her boss, doesn't respect her as a real officer. He seems to actively resent her being there, to the point that when she foils an actual robbery, he views it as worthy of a reprimand.
I got the bad guy. That's my job.
Your job is putting tickets on parked cars.
Judy did it. She got to be a police officer like she always wanted. But to her, that status was only meant to be a means towards making the world a better place. Now she realizes that her simply being in this role isn't enough to magically make everything right. It's no fault of her own, of course. She worked hard, we saw it. She has all the qualifications needed to be there. The primary obstacle standing in her way had been prejudice, and the mayor had seemingly removed that.
I am proud to announce that my Mammal Inclusion Initiative has produced its first Police Academy graduate.
And yet, ironically, that is thrown in her face as an excuse to hold her in disdain.
Do you think the mayor asked what I wanted when he assigned you to me?
Judy's mere presence in the force hasn't magically solved anti-rabbit sentiments. Why would it? Her simply being there isn't going to change everyone's mind. She reached one finish line only to find her struggle continues on. Now let's fast forward a bit to our deuteragonist.
Mr.
Wilde. Nick Wilde.
A red fox grinding the hustle with dubious legality, whose first encounter with Judy is when he swindles her into buying the materials he needs for said hustle. And while her experiences so far have poked holes into her view of the world, he's the first to directly oppose her beliefs.
Everyone comes to Zootopia thinking they can be anything they want. Well, you can't.
Right here. This is what I think Zootopia is good at. You don't see what I mean? Let me explain. Like I said, Zootopia is far from the first story to use metaphors to talk about prejudice. Since Aesop told his fables with tortoises and hares 25 centuries ago, we've used metaphors to help understand the world around us. That is extended into discussions about racism, sexism, xenophobia, and so on. And some of these stories definitely make their points better than others.
Fairy lives don't matter today.
That said, I think there are key points where Zootopia stands above most of its peers. One aspect I appreciate is that it's not a direct allegory for any one particular axis of prejudice. A lot of people I see talking about this movie seem to interpret it as carnivore equals people of color, herbivore equals people of not color. But I don't think the text supports that reading. Carnivores are only 10% of the population. Considering that, they seem overrepresented in the Zootopia Police Department. The mayor of Zootopia himself is a lion, and he seems relatively popular, at least popular enough to get programs he wants passed. Meanwhile, a major driving force of the conflict is Judy experiencing discrimination, reinforced through her parents trying to lower her expectations, and even through violence. This dynamic prevents the movie from feeling one note, and more importantly, it saves the film from being chained to any particular real-world parallel. I believe that is a good thing. Just because a movie about prejudice doesn't correlate with American racial politics, that doesn't make it irrelevant. I'm going to say that again. Just because a movie about prejudice doesn't correlate with American racial politics, that doesn't make it irrelevant. Sure, it's not comprehensive, but I believe that it still showcases scenarios that can show how prejudice can manifest in similar ways in our world. This is where I think it can be an accessible point of entry for people who want to learn more about prejudice or start conversations with kids. And another reason for that, another of its greatest strengths, is one simple fact about its setting. A very key fact that none of the other media I showed you here can claim. Zootopia is a place that claims to not have prejudice. That's actually the reason I'm very happy that the film decided to do away with the shot collar idea. During Zootopia's production, they had explored a far darker version of the setting. In this iteration, predators were required by law to wear collars that would deliver a painful shock anytime they got excited. Excited from anger, excited from joy, any strong emotion. This idea got really far too, to the point where rough animation was done for a scene.
With this collar, Zootopia accepts you.
With this color, Zootopia accepts me.
I can't lie, that is a genuinely well-delivered, heartbreaking moment. But at the same time, I feel like committing to this dystopian vision of the setting would have ultimately harmed the movie as a whole. I mean, I would argue it's a little bleak for a family movie, but even more importantly, it's just so unsubtle. Because prejudice isn't always explicitly violent. It doesn't always look like slums patrolled by armed men. It doesn't always look like people standing at the back of the bus. And when that's the only thing that stories tell their people to look for, it's easy to look at our world and say that all the racism is gone. But prejudice is often quieter than that. It looks like a well-intentioned program undermined by the very organization it's meant to be fixing. It looks like someone dismissing an account just because of who it comes from.
You think I'm going to believe a fox?
Sir, I know what I saw. He almost killed us.
Or maybe any aggressive predator looks savage to you rabbits.
It looks like someone setting intentionally impossible goals to have an excuse for action.
2 days to find the otter, or you quit. That was the deal. badge.
But of course, that's not the only thing it looks like. It also looks like someone who's a little too quick on the draw when they see a fox. It looks like someone who otherwise means well, taking correct facts.
So, predators are the only ones going savage?
That is accurate. Yes, that is accurate.
And using them to jump to incorrect conclusions and communicating those conclusions to the world.
For whatever reason, they seem to be reverting back to their primitive savage ways.
And this is where I think the film delivers its most important message. See, racism is bad. Sexism is bad. Homophobia is bad. And so our minds naturally think of people who believe in these things as simply bad people. It's easy to picture a racist, a sexist, a homophobe as someone openly unpleasant and vocal, as someone who is overall a terrible person in even completely unrelated ways. This makes them easy to identify, which is great, because that means good people are never prejudiced ever, not even by accident. Right? Judy Hopps, at her core, is a good person. All her life she's wanted to make the world a better place. But in this moment, she messes up. She messes up badly. And the terrible thing isn't that she chose to stab Nick in the back, because she didn't. The terrible thing is, she's not even aware of what she's done.
Oh, I think you said plenty.
What do you mean?
Let me ask you a question. Are you afraid of me? Do you think I might go nuts?
If nothing else, if literally nothing else, I am most impressed by the movie having the nuance to say this. Bad things aren't only done by bad people. The well-intentioned can have lapses in judgment. The enlightened can have blind spots of ignorance. And Judy is indeed virtuous enough to have the humility to admit that she's failed in her duty.
I came here to make the world a better place, but I think I broke it. A good cop is supposed to serve and protect, help the city, not tear it apart. I don't deserve this badge.
Judy is overwhelmed by the fact that she can't just fix this. Or can she? Because she suddenly gets tipped off to a possible new lead, and after reconciling with Nick, they rush off to uncover the heart of the carnivore attacks, and they find a conspiracy afoot, headed by none other than formerly assistant Mayor Bellwether. She's ended up becoming one of the more infamous twist villains of 2010's Disney, except I actually kinda like this direction of the story. And I know one other person who does, a good friend of mine who's been wanting to talk about this for a little while.
Who's there? Oh, it's just you, Daniel, never mind. Since Daniel said most of the stuff that I have to say that's positive about this movie's thematic ideas, I want to place focus on what this movie has to say about power dynamics in the context of oppression. Zootopia is a movie that recognizes how internalized biases are often driven by emotion rather than logic. And even though Bellwether is by far the weakest of the three twist villains from a narrative standpoint, she represents this idea very effectively. She can't use her own personal taste for predators as a reason to turn an entire population against them, though. It would make her look irrational to the average individual. After all, Zootopia markets itself as being a zoo utopia, and that's why she goes through all the trouble to make the animals she targets go savage. To create an illusion of rationality as a way to cover up her prejudice. If it is only predators going savage, something most of the characters already believe to only be biologically possible for them, boom, species infighting. These false narratives are built on fear because it's what drives conflict amongst people. It's something that's unique to this movie's world while saying something that can be applied to ours, and is a catalyst for what's amongst some of my favorite characterization in Walt Disney Animation's canon through the two leads. And we could talk about how aspects of this film that don't hold up with people having a deeper understanding of how racism as a system is perpetuated in the real world, like basically the entire cop plot line, but I'm not getting into that here. But it's through both my interpretation and Daniel's that still makes me think it both has value on its own and adds something meaningful to a real world issue in a way that, let's be honest, is a lot more easily digestible for kids.
Honestly, I very strongly agree. I think that while Judy is a potent example of well-intentioned people accidentally spreading prejudice, Bellwether is a potent example of ill-intentioned people purposefully weaponizing prejudice. Because it's always worth asking, who truly benefits from such ideas and beliefs? It's one of the many strengths that I think Zootopia does have a legitimate claim to. Again, this movie's not a seminal text of critical race theory. I don't believe it intended to be. It doesn't address a lot of the issues that we face when it comes to prejudice, that is true. The quiet, insidious nature of discrimination. The difficulty of implementing affirmative action. The way people who face prejudice can hold prejudices of their own. The way true facts can paint untrue pictures. These are addressed in the movie. I also won't argue that these things are all handled perfectly. Bogo's change of heart about Judy does feel like a heel turn, even if she did crack that big case. Nick and Judy's reconciliation is fast too, but I can excuse these for the narrative's sake. I don't think they completely invalidate the concepts that the audience is presented with, and I don't think whatever faults the movie has obscure the level of nuance it has for a movie aimed at children. Hell, many movies aimed specifically at adults struggle to pull this trick off. I really appreciate this film. Beyond being a genuinely really funny movie with great art direction and design, I think its message is valuable and worth listening to. Because in the end, no one of us can stop prejudice. Not by ourselves. All we can each do is resolve to try and make the world a better place. All we can do is take one step closer to a society where anyone truly can be anything.